Very complicated legacy when it comes to how we look at him and the sport of college football and life. So, Bill McCartney had battled dementia for a bit, and he passed away at the age of 84. Now, here's something in this whole Colorado Nebraska love hate, where that's where it started, was Bill McCartney. Tom Osborne went to see him this week.
Really?
Before he passed away, T.O. went to say goodbye to Bill McCartney. And you talk about two guys that were at the end of the spectrum. But I will say this, and Mac and T.O. talk about the odd couple. But in a little bit of a way, they were kind of similar. You have to separate, in my opinion, Bill McCartney, the football coach, and Bill McCartney, the person. Because there are some things as he went to Promise Keepers, and some people that were in Promise Keepers, and I have a friend that did that, he will say that it was clergy cult-like. But then I've heard other people say it was a complete turnaround of their life. Bill McCartney, though, a little bit of a hypocrite. Got to get your house in order. Okay, but then you're so I separate Bill McCartney, the football coach, and Bill McCartney, the individual. The 30 for 30 that they did on Bill McCartney in Colorado football around the 90 season, which they won a national title, but they also had a fifth down, is one of the best 30 for 30s. Now, it doesn't paint Nebraska in a good light, because included in that is the Sal is dead, go big red, and the hate between Nebraska and Colorado. But I say this. Thank you, Bill McCartney, the football coach, who had unbelievable legacy in terms of coaches that were assistants that went on to head coaching jobs, players, and success. He took over a downtrodden program at CU, which ironically, almost a decade earlier, Tom Osborne almost took that job.
Yeah.
So he gave Colorado football direction. And the smartness of Bill McCartney, and this is where I give him credit, is he identified Nebraska as the school we're going after to drive their program. So he built up so much hate for Nebraska because Nebraska was at the top of the food chain. And to get to the top of the food chain, you had to beat Nebraska. And you know what? For a fan base that was non-existent, what do? You create hate against your border school. All the Nebraskans that go skiing in Colorado and summer in Colorado, we hate them. No more red. Hate Nebraska. Hate Nebraska. Hate Nebraska. Smart play by him. And you saw what it did. It drove Colorado football. It also, I'm going to tell you, and maybe this is, I can't say this because I'm doing a talk show in Omaha and we friggin' hate Colorado. It's the best thing that happened to Nebraska football. The timing was perfect because when Colorado was starting to emerge in the late 80s and into, McCartney was done in 94. It's not like he coached there forever.
Yeah, no,
he was done in 94.
Pretty quickly after they won the national title.
Colorado football came along at the right time for Nebraska because Nebraska was driven by Oklahoma in their own conference, and then you were driven by how do you beat Florida State? How do you beat Miami? Colorado comes along, and they're a foil, and they're good. And so Nebraska had to adjust to Colorado, and it drove Nebraska, and Nebraska finally had somebody to replace Oklahoma. I thank Bill McCartney for that because you know what? That was a driving force that added another element to that stretch in the 90s of great Nebraska football. And to this day, the 94 game in Lincoln between Nebraska and Colorado, a banger of a game. Don't let yourself ever forget that Nebraska manhandled that Colorado team. That is the most talented opposing team that's ever come into Memorial Stadium. The 1994 Colorado team. They had 27 guys drafted off of that team. They had the Heisman Trophy winner off of that team. So there is part of me that says, thank you to Bill McCartney. You came along at the right time for Nebraska. What you did to your fan base and what they did to our fan base won't forgive you. I separate the football coach to the person.
Sure.
But a hell of a legacy. Passed away at the age of 84. But isn't it something that T.O. went to say goodbye in person to Mac? Just an odd couple that I think kind of needed each other at that time. Because remember, there was Tommy Frazier headed to Colorado. Nebraska takes him from Colorado. The rest is history.
First off, I'm not surprised at all that T.O. went and visited Coach Mack, because that's just the type of guy that Tom is. I mean, he's always been class. He's always been professional. That's the number one thing that anyone who's ever talked about Tom Osborne has talked about. So it doesn't surprise me whatsoever. Do you know what makes sports better?
Hate. Rivalries. But this was more than a rivalry. This was pure hate. And I don't think it was long enough to be like I'm not jumping on you, but
sure, go ahead.
Considered a rivalry.
Take it.
But it was pure hate. I mean, hate on the field, hate off the field.
So
from a guy who preached differently after his time at Colorado.
I came to Nebraska. I actually went to a Colorado Buffaloes running camp, and this was when I was like 16. Went there, visited the campus.
Hope you didn't wear red.
They throw anything. I was in high school at the time. I had no idea that I was going to end up going to Nebraska. So I bought a Colorado Buffaloes quarter zip, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now, after going to Nebraska for 4 years, first off, my buddy walked into my closet in college and saw that I had a Colorado Buffaloes quarter zip because I just packed it. It was nice. And he took it and he goes, "The hell you doing?" Threw it away. Like, he threw it out. He was just like, "You don't wear this." He's like, "You don't wear this. Like, this, you cannot wear. You cannot have this. You cannot be wearing this thing. This is not what you wear." And I knew that there was rivalry, but I didn't know it was like that. You know what I'm saying? And then now I look at my pictures, because there's plenty of pictures that I had with that CU quarter zip on, because it was a great quarter zip. It was very comfortable. I'm like disgusted in myself looking at it. I'm like, I can't show this anymore. Like, no one can see this. Like, this is a bad look for me. So the fact that, like, I felt that way and I feel that way about that football team, and it definitely has a lot to do with Deion too. And like, that's accentuated a bit, at least in terms of my feelings. But the fact that I feel that way about a football team that's not even in my conference, that hasn't been in my conference that's never been in the conference, hasn't been in the same conference as Nebraska for 15 years now, that has rarely played them since Nebraska has left the Big 12. I think it's been 4 matchups at this point that they've played each other. The fact that hate still resonates just speaks to the rivalry that occurred in the late 80s and the 90s. And I think that rivalries and hate and actual stakes and wanting to win a football game as if you're on the actual team makes sports better for fans. And Bill McCartney, like you said, questionable off the field stuff.
The person Bill McCartney is very complicated.
Very complicated. But what he did for that football program, and what he did just for football in general, football is better when there are more. When there is a surplus of good teams. When there's more good teams, football is just better in general. And so he took Colorado from a stuttering no man's land program to someone who now has actual football tradition, and football is taken seriously, and that they want to win games there. So all respect to him. Rest in peace. You can feel the way you want to feel about the guy, but he's the
most hated opposing coach that Nebraska's ever gone against from a conference.
The building up of Colorado did a lot for Nebraska. Yeah. And so you have to respect him for that. You don't have to love him. You don't even have to like him. But you do have to respect him for what he did.
Now it's a fake football program.
I think I question me saying that. Look, they did go 8-4, 9-3.
They didn't show up for their bowl game.
They didn't have a good year. They didn't really play a whole lot of really good teams. I mean, they're in the Big 12, and the Big 12 was not.
But I don't consider Colorado a strong college football program when I look at their fan base. They're like, "Oh man, Deion's here. All right, let's jump on it."
Good point. They went 0-11, and they were nowhere to be found before Deion showed up.
But Matt came along. Matt came along at the right time for Colorado, and Colorado came along at the right time for Nebraska. John writes in. There was an article about McCartney on The Athletic. The comments were very contentious over his Promise Keepers organization. Many were flagged. Whoa, John. I just left a simple comment that, as far as I know, hasn't been flagged. I simply said, Sal is dead, go Big Red. One guy did call me an idiot, though. So, again, the 30 for 30 was very fascinating to me.
I have to watch.
That's a good way to put it.
I should watch.
You should watch
again.
I'll watch that tonight.
You got to separate the football coach and the person. But Nebraska has a prominent role in Bill McCartney's Colorado life.
And McCartney has a prominent role in, Nebraska.
They needed each other.
Yeah. But not long. But I do want to just caution, when we talk about McCartney, you would think that he was there for a long time. I mean,
No,
he got out after the 94 season, which we were all shocked.
He was young.
He was young. Jeff writes in.
He was there for 13 years, which isn't that long for a guy who won that much.
Mm-hmm.
He was in his
Especially
early to
in that
mid-50s.
era.
But it wasn't until late 80s that they got it rolling.
No,
And
they
then they needed a fifth down against Missouri to stay alive and win the national championship.
That's okay. Made them sad.
Jeff writes in, hi guys. A few thoughts on Colorado and Mac. Let me start by saying I absolutely love the state of Colorado. I think it's a beautiful place and I can see myself retiring there. That said, a percentage of the Colorado population seem to think they are better than you because they live there. They come across like they made the mountains themselves. That brings me to Bill McCartney. Credit to him for building up the Colorado program. I have no problem at all with him designating Nebraska their rival, but Bill made it personal. He had plenty to say about Nebraska as a state, our people. Now that went both ways, the sign that read, Sal is dead, go Big Red. That wasn't okay then, now, or 20 years from now. I agree with that. That was not good. That's one of the low points from the fan perspective in Memorial Stadium. That's me talking, and Jeff. I could comment on him having an affair, but I don't know his exact situation. I'm not going to question someone that claims to have found their faith, which he apparently did post-affair. I sat in the north end zone my entire life, and one of the great things about sitting there was going down and watching the opposing team walk out. Darian Hagan, Chad Brown, Charles Johnson, Bieniemy. The list is large, and it was a great rivalry for a time. Go back and look at the guys that were wearing red that day and that were wearing white that day. The starting 22 on both sides in the 94 Nebraska-Colorado game, unfriggin' believable.
You'd spend less time finding who wasn't a dude.
My computer's not working.
He could recruit and he could get talent, and he had some unbelievable players towards the tail end. But think about here's how you know that McCartney made an impact from the Nebraska standpoint. Think about the games that were gut punches and the games that you won out of anger. What's a common theme? Bill McCartney's on the sidelines for Colorado.
Sure.
The 90 game here. The 91 game that ended in a tie. And then 92 here as payback.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, 94 in a matchup of the two best teams in college football at the time. And still, I mean, the Colorado lost a game, but Colorado, that was the only game they lost all season long. I mean, Colorado has a place in that about 5-6 year stretch. Even a game where Jeff Campbell returned a punt out there, you're like, officials got in the way. It's
rivalries and hate add to sports, and I credit him for recognizing the fact that Nebraska was the target that he had to go after. And I think part of me can respect the fact that he was doing what he did and saying what he said because he knew it was for the betterment of his program. And I'm not going to knock a guy for doing what they think is best for themselves and the people that they're responsible for. And there was a benefit to him and a benefit to Nebraska for what he did. Same time, not the, like you said, complicated guy off the field. But the things that he did and the program that he built and the football coach that he was, you can't help but respect and almost be a little bit thankful for Bill McCartney's presence in the 90s because it made it that much more memorable. There are now a whole slew of games during that decade that include his team, that include good memories, that include feelings that people who were alive and massive Husker fans at the time will never forget. And so while you can say what you want to say about his questionable decisions off the field, on the field, he made a massive impact for not only just his program, but other programs. And I think that speaks a lot to the football guy he was.
When you say those two schools to this day, I still think T.O. and Bill McCartney, 30 years later, they've had both schools have had great coaches post that. But I still think to this day, T.O. on one side, Bill McCartney on the other side. Part of it's because I was lucky enough to grow up to watch those games as a kid. But then even looking today, and when I saw that, I thought of you because we've talked about Mac on this show, and we've talked about, obviously, that rivalry and those stories and your stories. But those are the two guys I still think. I always will.
Yeah, it's such an odd couple.
And yeah, you should watch that 30 for 30 tonight.
I know.
Man. It's a really good
Turn
one.
that on.
And it gives you all the feels of what it was like that time watching those two compete. It was fun. Someone tweeted in at us, 94 CU game was intense of a game as I've ever been in Memorial, but to this day, the 92 game is one of the most enjoyable experiences I've ever had in that stadium, coming off 2 losses and a tie. Running the Buffs out of the stadium that day was phenomenal.
52-7.
Shout out Will Shields.
Anger. Absolute anger in the stadium that day. After the BS that happened in 90 and then the snowball when Byron Bennett's getting ready to kick a field goal in 91. Yeah.